So yeah, international SEO beginner's guide. And please do, if you have any questions, put it in the chat. And then Andy is going to man that and answer anything that you have. We can also answer any questions at the end as well. Cool. So introduction, what is international SEO? We'll talk about that, who needs it, why you need it, and the main benefits. So what is international SEO? It's basically the practice of improving the search engine optimization for your website that either has multiple languages or countries or both for the purpose of increased exposure, higher rankings, and more customers to your sites. So who needs it? Basically, any business who wants to reach a large audience in their existing country or local area, or expand their business into new countries or new local areas. So it can either be in an existing country, an existing local area. Let's say you have a local business in, let's say, London, for example, that you want to expand, or expand into different countries. You might want to expand into the US or Canada or Australia or any other country out there. So that's another reason why you would do something like this. So why do you need it? Basically, to make sure that the right content page appears in the right search engine based on the language and or intended country. So on the left-hand side, you'll see 3 pages. One is in English, 2 are in French, but one is targeting the UK market, the other the France market. And Google and other search engines might get confused which page to serve up where. Now, if you do have international SEO locked down and implemented correctly, the pages will show up in the correct search engines for the correct languages. So the idea is for the French page targeting France to show up in Google FR for the French language, and Google UK for the French language there too, targeting the UK market. So why do you need it? Number 2 is to avoid the risk of duplicate content so that search engines know which piece of content is unique. So this is different than using canonical tags for content in the same language. This is to do with different languages or different locales. You might have very similar content pieces, but they're targeting different countries because of the culture differences or the dialect or whatnot. So we want to make sure that it's all aligned. Now, what are some of the benefits? Basically, you can reach a higher audience. Let's say you have your website in multiple languages. You can reach those markets that speak different languages. If you're expanding into a different country, you can obviously increase your business and traffic from there, get additional rankings in those search engines. Also, increased opportunities to get backlinks. So you might not have that before if you hadn't translated, if you hadn't targeted a different country. So people in those areas will link to you. Also, you'll spot opportunities to fulfill gaps in search market demand. Some countries might have a lot higher search demand for specific topics. Others might have much lower. So it's really important to also look at that, and we'll explore that in a bit more. Also, decreased page bounce rate, meaning people who land on your site, who read your content with their native language will obviously stick around much longer. And if it's relevant to them, they'll explore additional pages on your site. So there's more engagement and increased conversion rates for products or services that you have on your site. So how does it work? So we'll explore a few different things, particularly comparing the country versus language. You'll learn about the hreflang tag and what that means and how to implement it, what the difference between the hreflang and canonicalization is. Then we'll talk about some international search engines and how to structure your website. This is where it gets a bit technical, but it's also very important to understand how that works. And we'll talk about foreign keyword research, machine versus human translation, and what the difference is between translation and localization. So let's start with the first one, country versus language. So a country can have multiple languages. So let's say UK, for example. I'm sure there's a lot of other languages spoken in the UK, but let's just take three, for example. English, primary, and there's a French market, Spanish, I'm sure there's German market, Chinese. There's a lot of other languages that are spoken there. So it could be that your business is expanding and wants to open up to different languages. The middle one here is a language can be spoken in multiple countries. So you might have just one language on your website, but targeting multiple countries. So it could be that you create different content for the UK versus Canada versus the US. So that's another option. And another one is that each one is unique. So it could be you have France speaking French-speaking Canadians and French-speaking in France. So different dialects across different countries. They're slightly different as well. So let's talk about the hreflang tag. So you'll see in purple there an example of how that looks. And this would go in the head section of your website. And this was introduced by Google in December 2011. And it's basically signal. So it's not a must-have, but it gives a hint to search engines as to what to do with the content. So it can be used just for languages or with both languages and countries. And that's how you would implement it. So you see that here it says EN for English. So the language goes first, hyphen, and then the country code. So it's an ISO country code. So GB for the United Kingdom. So what's the difference then between canonicalization versus hreflang? Basically, canonicalization is a tool that's used to specify which page out of a set of duplicate or highly similar pages to return. So this is basically for one language, one country. As soon as you add multiple regions or multiple languages or any combination thereof, that's where hreflang comes in to show which pages based on a language or region should be shown up in a search, in which search engine ideally. So, for example, internationally, these are the main search engines and their market share. So Google obviously is dominating the market all over. Bing is following up with 3%. And we have Yahoo, Yandex, Baidu, and DuckDuckGo. There's many others, but those are the primary ones. So obviously, we want to make sure that our website is optimized for Google, ideally for Bing and Yahoo as well, if you want to capture that 4.2% of the global share as well. Now, for Chinese search engines, we have Baidu, Sogu, Bing. So this is an example of a different country that might have various other search engines dominating that market. So let's say your business is expanding into China, for example, you want to make sure that your website is optimized for those specific primary search engines. So whenever you're going to a different country, make sure that you check out which search engines are used the most and follow their guidelines as well. Now, here's where it gets a bit more technical. So I'll go a bit slower. These are some of the terms that we need to be familiar with so that when we go through, we know what to do. So you might have heard these terms, but CCTLD is basically the country specific or country code specific top level domains. For example, example.uk, .de, .ca, .com.au, anything that indicates that that domain is within a country or targeting a country. Then it's GTLD. Those are generic ones. So .com, .net, .co, etc. So that's not country specific. So you can use that domain in pretty much any country. And then you have subfolder. So a folder within the domain, and that can be nested many layers deep. Parameters, basically a variable in the URL with a value. So it looks like that. And a subdomain, a domain that's subdivided into separate spaces. And you can also have second level subdomains. So it could be subdomain.subdomain.example.com. So those are the main terms that we'll be discussing next. So let's say you have a website, a business, and you're only targeting different countries. It's going to be, let's assume it's in English, and you want to target, let's say UK, US, Canada, Australia, etc. And you want to expand in that regard. So there's three options here. Option one is to have different CCTLDs. So it could be that you have a .uk, a .us, and a .ca domain, one for each of the markets. Option two is a GTLD, so general one, say .com, and then you divide the countries by subfolder. So it'd be /GB, /US, /CA, for example. And then finally, you have GTLD plus subdomain. So it could be gb.example.com or us. Or ca. And so those are different ways of doing it. Now, you might be asking or thinking right now, which one is the best? Well, there is no best. It really depends on your preferences and architecture and resources. Ideally, if you want to keep it simple, you do the second option, which is generic TLD plus subfolder. That way you can keep one domain and keep all the domain authority and the backlinks and basically all of that intact on one single domain, and then expand that way. If you have different architectures or different technology, or even have the resources to have separate domains, then I would go with the CCTLD or the subdomain. Again, keep in mind that this will make it difficult to rank because it's a completely different domain, and you'll need to build up backlinks specifically to that new domain, which can take some time. Also, there's more maintenance and technical management that goes into upkeeping multiple websites. So just keep that in mind as well. So that's for country only. Now, let's say you want to stay in a single country, let's say UK, but you want to make it open to more languages, more cultures within that. So there's three options. First is GTLD plus subfolder. So you put the country code there, /EN, for example, or you can use a parameter. So language equals or lang equals EN, or you can use a subdomain. So en.example.com. And then you would just replace that with whatever language code that you're targeting. Again, what's the best option here? I would say number one, it's the cleanest. And again, it keeps all the domain authority intact and makes it easier. So keep that in mind. The second one might be only possible on some platforms because depending on how it's programmed, sometimes it's difficult to just do it like number one. So it could be that it just ends up having parameters. And obviously number three, it splits it up and you'll have basically different websites because it's a different subdomain. So that again will make it more difficult to rank over time. You'll just need more backlinks and more authority for that. Now, the most complicated is having both, but there's basically 7 different options here. And I'm going to go quickly through them. So the first one is using a generic top-level domain plus subfolders. So first comes the country, then comes the language. So /GB/EM. Next option is the subfolder plus parameter. It's pretty much the same as option one, but you're going to use a parameter. Again, limited to your technology or your programming language. That's how it is. Number 3 is subdomain plus parameter. And again, you might want to split it up if you want to have separate websites, separate domains. The same thing goes for the next one. It's the subdomain plus subfolder. The next 3 are CCTLDs between subfolders, parameters, and subdomains. So again, all these are combinations. Just note that on the last one, the subdomain is the language, and then we use a ccTLD to determine the country, the targeting country. So that's, and again, the question is, which one do you use? Again, it depends on your resources, depends on, how, if you can get more backlinks, it depends on how many sites you can manage and all of that. If you want to keep it simple, just do the subfolders. It's a lot easier because it keeps it on one domain, and you can just split everything there. So let's talk about foreign keyword research. So for each country and or language, you need to do separate keyword research to find the highest value search terms to build and prioritize the content around. And why do you need to do that? Why can't it just be the one-off? Because basically each country might have different demands, search demands. For example, and this is interesting, if you do want to do a quick Google search, actually, cheese in the US versus cheese in South Korea, the demands of these products are completely opposite. So it could be that, let's say you have a cheese business in London and you're looking to go expand into the US, great. But maybe it's not wise to expand into South Korea. Now, another option is the varying words or spellings. For example, it could be that you split up the targeting because your products need to be renamed. For example, if you have a clothes store, a retail e-com store, you might call these products jumpers, whereas in Canada, US, they're known as sweaters. And also unique cultures. For example, let's say you have a restaurant, and you're writing an article about Spanish food. Maybe you're going to be talking about paella in the Spanish market, for an example, or enchiladas in Mexico, particularly because each culture might have their own food, language, traditions. So you might have to customize each article, each page towards different cultures. So machine versus human translation. With AI these days, it's so easy to just click a button and generate something. So which one should we use? I mean, should we use software? Should we use both? Problem with machine translation is even today, it often has inaccuracies because it translates word for word or even bytes by bytes. However, human translation is the most accurate because it preserves the meaning as close as possible. And that's the goal of translation. We don't want to just translate the words. We want to make sure that the meaning is intact. Translation versus localization. So once we've translated it, the next step is localization, which basically takes the dialects, the culture, and the different words or spellings across the countries or locales into consideration. So it could be that you have a page that talks about, I don't know, XYZ targeting London, and that might have a slightly different subculture than if you're targeting, let's say, Scotland or a different part of England where the subculture might be slightly different. Or let's talk about, if you have a page in French and you're targeting France, again, if you're targeting Canada and Quebec, a completely different culture and dialects as well. So again, these things are important to remember when you're doing localization. So here's some easy ways to implement international SEO. We'll talk about the 5 CMS platforms, some plugins, and an alternative solution. So the top 5 CMS plugins are platforms by market share. We got WordPress, most of the share. We got Shopify, Wix, Squarespace, Joomla. There's a bunch of others I couldn't fit on the slides, but these are the top 5. So don't worry if it's not here. You can do a quick Google search. Most of these platforms have their own plugins for international. So let's go start with WordPress. So here are some of the top plugins that you can use for international SEO. So WPML, Translate Press, Polylang, Multilingual Press, Weglot, and Bablick. For Shopify, you have Langify, Langshop, Multilingo, Weglot, and Bablick. For Wix, you have Wix Multilingual, Weglot, and Babblik. And Squarespace, you have SquareCamp Multilingualizer plugin, Weglot, Babblik, and EasyLing. In Joomla, we have Faleng, JDiction, Speedy Translate, and Babblik. Now, you've probably seen a few recurrences here with Weglot and Babblik, and I just want to just highlight the fact that these are external platforms that basically translate the text on the page using JavaScript. So it's not an actual new page. It just translates right on there, which can be a bit problematic when it comes to SEO because it doesn't create a new URL. It keeps the same URL. And in this case, it can confuse search engines as to, let's say we have this single page. It's wondering, is it in this language, this one, or this one? But because it shapeshifts almost into different languages, it might not be the best in terms of the structure. So ideally, if you can find a native plugin that allows you to change the structure of the site, then do that first. But however, at worst case scenario, if you have to translate, then you can go third party. So the alternative solution obviously is Hike. You can reach out to us at the support team and we can answer any questions you have about your specific situation with international SEO, and anything that you need help with in terms of adding multiple languages or different countries or any support or questions that you have. So finally, we want to improve your performance. So we'll talk about international signals, important metrics to keep in mind of, and next steps. So international signals, basically, these are signals that the search engines will look for when determining whether a page should be ranked locally or which country it should. So for example, using a local IP address for a specific website, linking to local content or websites, building backlinks from local resources or directories, optimizing for local search engines. For example, in China, you might optimize for Baidu. Share content on local social media platforms. Let's say there's a country uses specific social media that isn't in other countries. You might want to share the content on there as well. So all of these little signals create context around, oh, this page is meant for this country in this language. It really helps. So some important metrics you want to measure as you go through. Keyword ranking, obviously, but you want to rank, obviously, for each country. If you're targeting 3 countries and then you want to basically rank you want to make sure that you track your keywords in those 3 countries. Organic unique visits, average engagement rate, bounce rate, average time on the website, obviously longer the better, conversion rate, the percent returning visitors, and then looking closely at the specific locations that you're attracting visitors from. And then you can see that it's becoming effective, or you need to make some tweaks or add more content. So next steps, obviously use Hike SEO platform to improve your international reach. Translate and or localize your content if you're doing multiple languages or if you're targeting multiple areas or locales. And ask for help if you don't know how to implement any of that, because there's a lot of stuff that we went through and it can be a bit ambiguous. So it really depends on your situation and whatnot. So thank you. And now it's question time. I'm happy to answer things.
There's not been too many questions.
No.
Gabriel.
Okay.
It's quite a complex topic. I guess what's the most common so thinking about our customers, would you recommend that they actively go out and try and find companies that do SEO or help their clients to do it? Like, is it something that they should stay away from? Is it something that they should embrace?
You mean for international, like expanding?
Yeah. So like if a client comes to them and says, like I want to do SEO, but I want to do it in the UK, I want to do it in France, I want to do it in the US. That's something that can seem quite overwhelming. Do you think that typically it is? what's the pros and cons, I guess, of doing international SEO?
Yeah, I think it's worth doing if you feel that your product, your service, your content is definitely going to reach more people there. It really comes down to business decision. The first question you need to ask is, why am I translating this, or why am I, want to localize this for a different country? Obviously, the answer should be, I want to reach that audience. For example, let's say you're expanding your business into the US or expanding into France, for example, then obviously, naturally, you'll need to translate into French and localize it for France. So it comes down primarily to business decision. Secondly, it comes down to asking, okay, now what platform am I using, and how easy will it be to actually allow that to happen? Depends on your CMS. And then that will determine the structure that you choose. And from there, you'll need to do the keyword research and the restructuring, the keyword mapping, and basically do everything that you would do for one language in one country, but duplicate it. Now, you don't have to keep in mind, you don't have to duplicate every single page. You can have some pages that are just in English and not translated. It really depends on what the demand is for that country, and also the keyword research that you do. Maybe there's keyword phrases in France that when you translate it have no equivalent in English. So all of these things come into play. I think it's definitely worth it if you want to almost, I would say, multiply your reach, because you're reaching a whole market that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I'd mention also is you might not actually have to do much of this if you're targeting countries that have the same language. So for Hike, for example, we target English speaking countries.
Mm,
Um, and if you look at our top competitors, so you look at SEMrush, Moz, etc., they rank really well in the US, they rank really well in the UK, they rank really well in Australia. Now, they don't have localized versions of their websites.
hmm
They
hmm
just have a single version.
Yeah,
They don't have like a UK page or a US page. They actually just have the one website that ranks across all those different countries because it's the same language. Then that's not always going to be the case for every
hmm
industry. So
yeah,
what I'd probably advise is before you go about doing it, just have a look, see who ranks for the same keyword in different countries, and see if the same websites are ranking and if they're localized, creating, localized copies of the website for the different location. Might save
yeah.
you time if you don't need to.
That's a great point. And I think, like you said, it applies to your specific business. Like, for example, a technology company like Hike, we're quite global. There's nothing really local about it, other than language. But if you're a local business and you have specific products, let's say you have, just a good example is, let's say you have a page that you're comparing your products to other competitors in your area. Great. Let's say you're targeting a different country. There's different competitors and different examples that you can give. So that might warrant creating a localized version.
Yeah. Cool. Got a couple more questions. So
Okay.
Rich has asked, does the tag mentioned at the start, I assume that's the hreflang tag, um, allow us to get Australian Google searches to find a specific Aussie focus page?
Yeah. So I'm assuming that's in English. Yeah. So basically, this tag, you would just adjust the country code there. So it'd be EN hyphen AU. Okay, so that would basically target the Australia, or um, you just replace that country code with the country that you want to target.
Yeah. Yeah. And for example, if you were trying to like get people in the UK that are Australian, the
Hmm.
only way that Google would know to serve an Australian, I believe, and Gabriel, correct me if I'm wrong, is if that Australian searcher, if he or she's based in the UK,
Hmm.
they've changed their site settings within the Google settings to Australia.
Correct. Yeah.
So otherwise they wouldn't know.
Yeah, exactly. They would have to basically force it on their browser so that it would serve up the right one, or use a VPN, if that's the other way to do it.
Cool. So what Rich said is he wants Aussie residents in Australia. So that's a lot more simple. That's just using the
Okay.
hreflang as normal, right?
Yeah, correct. That's right.
Cool. Bernie's asked, is it possible to tag a page so that it does not appear in a certain country? To almost disallow it from a certain country.
That's a really good question, actually. I'm not aware of that. I think it's just not have it tagged, period, so that you just show the generic version. Because the only way that a search engine won't index it is if you have a no index tag on there. So there's no real way to do it for like excluding a specific language. The other option actually is, depending on your technology, you can have like an IP blocker. So depending on, let's say someone lands on a site, and I've seen this many times, it will basically say, oh, this website is not available for your country, because it detects your IP or geolocation. And that's the only other way I can think of if you really don't want a specific country to access your website.
Yeah, I used to work at an e-commerce brand called Claire's, and essentially, if someone, so what we used to have we had a UK site and a US site, for example. Google used to get really confused. So someone searching in the US and the Google US search results would sometimes see UK results, and then people in the UK would sometimes see US results because the pages were pretty similar. So so what they actually implemented was a geo IP redirect where it would just automatically redirect them to the version that's most relevant. So even if Google served them with a UK page, as soon as they clicked on it, Claire's would know that they were a US person. It would redirect them to the US one.
Yeah, that's a great one too. Yeah. So I think WordPress and a bunch of the other ones have some plugins that you can do, so it geo redirects as well.
Yeah, cool.
Brilliant. Anyone else?
Any final questions? No, I think we're all good, Gabriel.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks everyone for joining today, and I'll share out the recording the next day or so, and we can go from there.